as long as we're dealing with the usability of our form, there's no label on this field, which is less than ideal. So let's do that. There's a couple ways we could do that. The first way, which is not the way I'm going to keep, so you don't necessarily need to type along with this, but we could use an actual label. So let's put a label element. And it should have an attribute called for, where you tell it which input you're labeling. So use the name. So flick name, this is the label for flick name. And let's say flick name. There we go. So what's the point of for? If I took that out, it looks the same. So who cares? Why bother? Anybody know? Anybody know what this gets us? Catherine, you think you know?
I remember from one of the videos that we had to watch that it links them, but I don't remember.
Yeah, it does under the hood make a connection between the two things. So one nice thing about that is if you have something like a checkbox, those are really small targets for your mouse, right? As long as the label next to it actually says for that checkbox, then you can click the label instead of clicking the checkbox. So that's a lot more usable. And also, if you're using some sort of assistive technology like a screen reader, so if you're blind and can't actually see the page, but you can tab through and then it reads what you're focused on. When you tab into that field, it won't be able to tell them what that field is, or it'll just use what's actually in the HTML or something, which may not be the most readable thing in the world if you've named your fields like XZY4800. But if there's a label that is for that field, it will read the label. So it's good for accessibility purposes. And it's just lazy not to. So always do that. It is supremely irritating when you're trying to click on a checkbox and they haven't made the labels, they haven't linked up the labels like this. You can also accomplish the same thing, incidentally, by actually putting the input inside the label. You can totally do that. That works. And then you don't need for. It'll achieve the same thing. But we're not going to use a label at all here. We're going to do it the other way. So you've probably seen it sometimes where there's already some text in there, and then as soon as you start typing, that text goes away. Anybody know what that's called? Placeholder. Placeholder, right. Who said that? Cool. So this is getting a little long, so I'm going to put some line breaks in here. Nothing wrong with that. You can totally put breaks in the middle of a tag between attributes. When I do this, I like to line up the angle brackets, closing and opening, so it's obvious when this element ends. So I'm going to put it right here. I do like to put autofocus at the end simply because it doesn't have a value. But the order of attributes has no effect in HTML. Placeholder equals enter a flick. Refresh. There we go. Enter a flick. And as soon as I start typing, it goes away, right? Cool. So add this commit will add a placeholder to the flick name field. So I have just added and committed all in one step, right? But it's still just on my laptop, so don't forget to push. And it crosses the dotted line to my remote, which happens to be GitHub. Questions about that? Placeholders, labels? We cool? Yeah?
So it was autofocus and then disappears when you start typing?
No, that's just how placeholders work.
Okay.
Yeah. Placeholders only there until you start typing something.